The room was too quiet when it happened. I was sitting across from the attorney, my hands shaking as he held the papers that would decide my life as a mother. My ex-husband, Brian, sat beside his mother, Caroline. I could feel her eyes on me before she even spoke. The attorney had just started reading when she leaned back in her chair and laughed. "Why is she so worried?" she said. "She's nothing but a free babysitter. That's all she ever was." The words hit me like a slap. My face burned. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it. I could not even breathe. I wanted to shout, but my voice disappeared. The attorney stopped reading. Brian looked down like a child caught cheating. In that moment, I felt small, like my love for my children meant nothing. Years of nights, homework, fevers, school projects, hugs, and tears all erased with 2 words. Free babysitter. Tears filled my eyes, but I sat still. I told myself not to break. Not here. Not in front of her. The attorney cleared his throat and said, "The court finds," then paused again as Caroline smirked, like she had already won. And I realized this was only the beginning. The attorney finished reading the decision. His voice felt slow, even though the words were sharp. Shared custody, but with primary placement listed under Brian's name. My time with my kids would be controlled. Rules. Schedules. Supervision suggestions. Caroline smiled wider as each line landed. I felt like the floor moved under me. I wanted to scream that this was wrong. I wanted someone to say they made a mistake. Instead, my throat hurt and my hands shook. Brian would not even look at me. He just nodded like the judge's words were normal. Caroline already began talking about school pickups and weekend plans as if the attorney was not even in the room. I finally spoke. "How did this happen?" My voice cracked. "This is not true. None of this is true." The attorney looked at me, then at Brian, then back at the papers. "There were statements that painted a different picture of your involvement," he said carefully. "It seems the court believed you were providing help rather than parenting." Providing help. Babysitting. Not mothering. The pain hurt so deeply that it felt physical. But under it, something else started to rise. Not hate. Not rage. A decision. I was not done. When we left the office, I sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel. I replayed everything. Statements. Evidence. Lies I had never seen. I called my attorney and asked for copies of every document used in court. When I read them that evening, my hands shook again. There were forms saying I was often unavailable. Notes claiming I preferred to work and leave the children with relatives. There were even lines saying the children were more settled with their grandmother. I had never said any of this. Then I saw it, my supposed signature on a document I did not remember signing. My name was there, almost like mine but slightly wrong. My stomach turned. Someone had planned this. I remembered months earlier when Caroline handed me papers for school records and rushed me, talking fast, distracting me. I had signed without reading. I felt sick knowing she might have used that moment against me. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a setup. My heart ached for my children more than for myself. They were the reason I kept breathing. They were the reason my hands stopped shaking long enough for me to whisper, "I'm going to fight this." And I meant it. The next day, I drove to the house that used to be mine too. It still looked the same from the outside, but it did not feel like home anymore. I rang the bell. Caroline opened the door slowly, blocking the entrance with her body, as if I was a stranger. "We're busy," she said. "You can come in for a few minutes." The children ran to me, hugging me tight. That alone almost broke me. Caroline watched us like a guard watching prisoners. She began reminding them loudly about new rules and approved times. When I walked into the living room, I noticed small cameras tucked on shelves. Even the kitchen had one pointing at the table. Something else caught my eye. Mail with my name on it had already been opened and laid aside. They had erased me from my own life, piece by piece. I stayed calm on the outside for my kids. Inside, I was shaking. I helped them pack their school bags and listened as they told me about new routines I was never told about. Before I left, Caroline leaned toward me and whispered, "You should be grateful we still let you help." I walked out without answering, but my silence was not weakness anymore. It was focus. Later that evening, I sat on the floor of my small apartment with my children. They sat close to me, like they were afraid I would vanish. My daughter finally asked the question they had been carrying inside. "Grandma says you're just here to help. Are you still our real mom?" The words pierced deeper than anything Caroline had ever said. I hugged them both and told them I loved them more than anything. But I could see the confusion in their eyes. Someone had been working slowly, bending their trust. Then I saw a tiny red light blinking near the bookshelf. Another hidden camera. Not in their house. In mine. They had placed it during a visit. Watching. Waiting for me to explode. Setting a trap to prove I was unstable. I stood up and spoke clearly so the camera could hear me. "I am your mother. I will protect you. I will not be pushed away." The recording light blinked back at me like an eye. For the first time, I was not afraid of it. I unplugged it and set it on the table. My heart was steady now. They wanted me to break. Instead, they had given me proof. The next day, Caroline showed up again, pretending it was just a normal visit. I could tell she was trying to provoke me. She criticized my apartment, my furniture, even the snacks I gave the kids. She kept talking loudly, glancing around like she expected to see the camera still recording. She wanted me to yell. She wanted me to look wild and angry on video. But I did not give her what she came for. Instead, I spoke slowly and clearly. "Caroline, I know exactly what you're doing. And I am going to deal with this legally." For a second, her face changed. It was small, but I saw it. Surprise. Annoyance. Fear that I might not be as weak as she thought. Then she smiled again. "We already planned for that." The words were calm, but cold. She believed she owned the ending. After she left, I sat down and wrote everything I could remember. Dates. Times. Comments. Every moment of control. Every recording device. Every lie. It didn't make the pain vanish, but it turned it into movement. I was no longer frozen in that office hearing "free babysitter." Now I was preparing for the long fight ahead. And I was ready. Here is the continuation. I will keep the same voice, structure, pacing, and grade 7 English. I will continue straight from chapter 6. The story will stay in first person and follow the storyline exactly with new twists each chapter. I went to the bank the next morning because something in the court papers bothered me. It talked about my weak financial position. That did not match reality. I had worked hard. I saved. I planned. When the teller printed out the account history, I felt cold all over. Large transfers had been made without my knowledge. Money moved into an account with Brian's name on it, not mine. There was a document authorizing it, again signed with a version of my name that looked almost right, but not right enough. My chest felt tight. This was bigger than custody. It was control of every part of my life. When I stepped outside, I sat in my car and closed my eyes. I remembered Caroline talking months ago about organizing finances and helping with paperwork. She had smiled kindly then. I saw now that nothing she did was simple. This was a plan. A long one. I called my attorney and told him about the missing funds and the false signatures. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "We will need all of that. Do not confront them yet. Document everything." I agreed. But inside, a stronger promise formed. They had taken enough from me. They were not taking my children too. That evening, I visited our old neighborhood because I needed air and familiar streets. A former neighbor, Mrs. Collins, stopped me on the sidewalk. She looked unsure at first, then she sighed and said she needed to tell me something. She said Caroline had been talking to people for months. She had said I was unreliable, that I vanished for days, and that the children were better off without too much confusion. I felt like the ground tilted again. Lies, spoken over and over until people believed them. Then the neighbor pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots from a parent group chat. My name appeared again and again, twisted into stories I did not recognize. They were shaping how the world saw me before court ever began. I thanked her and asked if she would be willing to tell the truth if needed. She nodded. As I walked back to my car, The night felt heavy, but I felt clearer than ever. They had not only tried to change the court's mind, they had tried to erase me from my own children's story. I looked at the dark house down the street where Caroline lived and said quietly to myself, "This ends." And I meant it. The next day, my attorney spread papers across his desk like puzzle pieces. Printed messages, screenshots, bank records, false signatures, hidden cameras. Every piece showed a pattern. Caroline had not just interfered. She had directed everything. There were group chats where she told Brian exactly what to say in court and how to describe me. She even wrote full sentences for him. One message made my hands shake when I read it. "We need her to look like extra help, not a real parent. Say it enough, and it sticks." It was right there in writing. Not rumor. Not fear. Proof. For the first time since that painful day in the attorney's office, I felt something different than hurt. I felt power even if it was still small. My attorney leaned forward and said, "This is serious custodial interference. This is bigger than disrespect. It affected the ruling." I nodded slowly. My heart was pounding, but not in fear this time. It was from the feeling that truth was no longer only inside my chest with no voice. We began planning next steps. This fight would not be loud. It would not be cruel. It would be patient, steady, and firm, the way a real parent protects their children. That night, after all the calls and all the plans, I finally let myself cry. Not the quiet tears I held back in the attorney's office. Real tears that shook my whole body. I thought about birthdays I planned, lunches I packed, fevers I soothed, lessons I taught, songs I sang at night when they were small. None of that had been seen in court. None of it had been counted. But as the tears slowed, something inside me changed. The sadness did not vanish, but it turned into something strong and steady. I stood in the bathroom, looked into the mirror, and said out loud, "I am their mother. Not a helper. Not a sitter. Their mother." I wiped my face and took a deep breath. I sat at the table and organized every paper into folders. Dates, screenshots, statements. Every piece mattered. I did not plan revenge that would hurt people. I planned truth. Real, simple truth that would stand without shouting. As I turned off the light and went to bed, I felt fear try to crawl back into my mind, but it could not stay the same way anymore. Because now I had direction, and I was ready for what came next. My attorney filed new motions. He explained each one slowly, so I would understand every line. We asked the court to reopen the case based on false statements, hidden manipulation, and interference. He told me that sometimes these cases moved slowly, but then something unexpected happened. The original judge stepped away from the case because of a previously undisclosed link with one of Caroline's friends. A new judge was assigned, one with no history with any of us. It changed everything. When I left the courthouse steps, I stood outside for a moment, feeling wind on my face. It felt like the first small shift in a long storm. Not a victory. Not yet. But movement. I texted Brian to tell him we had filed. He answered with only one line. "My mom said you're doing this out of spite." I stared at the words for a long time. I did not reply with anger. I simply wrote back, "I'm doing this for our children." Then I turned off my phone and walked away, not chasing, not explaining further. For the first time, I felt that I did not need their approval to stand up for what was right. The case was open again. So was the truth. A week later, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, a social worker stood there with a calm face and a clipboard. She said she needed to see the children in both homes. This was part of the new review. Caroline tried to take control of every conversation, answering questions not meant for her, speaking over me, correcting the children, even explaining what the right answers were. She acted kind, but her voice kept slipping into sharp commands. The social worker watched closely without showing much on her face. Then she asked to speak with the kids alone. Caroline tried to stay in the room, but the social worker gently asked her to step out. I saw irritation flash across Caroline's face before she covered it with another smile. The door closed. I waited in the hall, hands tight together. I did not know what my children would say. I did not know how deeply the words free babysitter had changed what they believed. Minutes felt like hours. Then the door opened, and I saw the social worker's eyes. They were softer now, thoughtful. She thanked us and said she would be in touch soon. My heart pounded. Something real had been heard in that room. Later, my children told me in quiet voices what they had said. They said they were told to practice answers before court. They said they were told that too much time with me would confuse them. They said Grandma told them to call me helper sometimes and not Mom when people were listening. Hearing that hurt more than anything else in this whole story. But mixed with the pain was relief. The truth was finally coming out of the right mouths. I hugged them gently. I told them no one ever had the right to rewrite their love or their family. I told them they could tell the truth even if adults told them not to. They listened. They nodded. And for the first time in months, they relaxed against me like they used to. That evening, as they slept on my couch during movie night, I looked at their faces and made myself another promise. This fight was not about winning against Caroline. It was about removing her control from our lives so my children could breathe again. The next morning, my attorney called. The social worker's report changes things, he said. And for the first time, hope did not feel fragile. It felt possible. More evidence arrived. My attorney gained access to emails through Discovery. When I read them, my stomach twisted again. There were messages from Caroline arranging schedules in ways that made it seem like I had missed visits I was never told about. She had written things like, "Don't tell her until the last minute. Then say she didn't show." The plan was written out so simply, like it was a normal chore list. But one line stood out the most. "We need her to become optional." That sentence was not just legal interference. It was erasure. I printed everything, highlighted key parts, and saved copies. I felt stronger because I was no longer guessing. I was not just feeling targeted. I could prove it. My attorney told me this could now support a serious change in custody. He also explained calmly that family court moves with care because children matter more than speed. I understood. Slow truth was still truth. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table. I thought again about the day in the office when Caroline called me a free babysitter. I realized something important. She said it because she believed it. She believed control made her the center of my children's lives. But love had always done that. And love was finally being seen. One afternoon, Brian came over alone. He looked different. Tired. Older. He asked if we could talk without lawyers, without his mother, without anger. I agreed because I needed answers too. He sat with his hands clasped and told me something I had never fully understood before. Caroline had controlled him since he was young. Decisions, money, work, even friendships. He said he felt he owed her everything and feared losing her approval. Then he said the words that shocked me. She promised to help me with money and housing if I agreed to follow her plan. I felt a mix of anger and sadness. Not only at him, but at how control can pass from one generation to the next like a shadow. I told him what the kids had said about coaching. I watched guilt cross his face. He did not defend himself this time. He did not hide. Before he left, Caroline's car pulled into the driveway. She saw us talking through the window. Her eyes went cold, sharp, calculating. "You just ruined everything," she said to him outside, not knowing I could hear. For the first time, I saw fear in her. Not fear of me, fear of truth. And truth was finally moving faster than her lies. The next public crack in her control happened at a school event. I arrived early and quietly sat in the back. When the children saw me, they smiled and waved. That alone filled my heart. Caroline rushed over, standing in front of me like I was not allowed to be there. Her voice grew louder as parents turned to look. "She doesn't belong here," she said. "She's only the babysitter. The school deals with real guardians." The room went still. The word hung in the air like a bad smell. Babysitter. Again. But this time, it did not break me. It revealed her. Multiple parents stared at her, shocked. A teacher stepped forward and calmly reminded her that I was listed as the children's mother and legal parent. Someone recorded the whole thing on their phone. Caroline realized what she had done too late. Her voice softened, but the damage was already done. Not to me, to her story. Later, the video was shared with my attorney. It showed not only her words, but her tone, her attempt to erase me in public, not just in courtrooms or private messages. I did not feel joy at her mistake. I felt something steadier. Validation. The truth no longer lived only inside me. My attorney filed an emergency motion soon after. With the emails, messages, fake signatures, recordings, school incident video, and the social worker's report, the court agreed there was enough evidence to reconsider custody right away. The courtroom felt different this time. Not because it was easier, but because I was no longer afraid of losing only through silence. This time, I had a voice. The judge listened carefully as the attorney presented proof of interference and manipulation. Caroline shifted in her seat again and again. Brian looked at the floor, not at anyone. The judge did not rule right there, but something changed in the air. He ordered temporary changes. More time with me. Clear rules blocking interference. Orders against coaching children or limiting communication. Caroline's face tightened, but she said nothing out loud. When we walked out, Brian stopped me in the hallway. He said, "I don't know how to undo all of this." I told him simply, "Start by telling the truth." He nodded slowly. The fight was still going, but balance was finally moving in the right direction. And it was not revenge driving it. It was protection. The custody evaluator arrived a week later. He spent time with me, with Brian, and with Caroline.
He watched how each of us spoke.
He watched how the children behaved near us. With me, they were relaxed. They talked freely. They laughed. With Caroline, they sat straighter, watching her face before they answered. She tried to sound sweet, but she kept correcting their answers, pushing them to say they felt more stable in her house. The evaluator took notes quietly. He asked questions that went deeper than schedules. He asked about feelings, safety, rules, and who made decisions. Caroline tried to answer every question meant for Brian. That alone said more than any speech. When the evaluator left my home, he paused at the door and said, "My report will address influence and boundaries." Those words stayed with me all night. Influence. Boundaries. Two things that had twisted our lives for months, maybe years. I sat at the kitchen table with tea and thought about the girl I used to be before marriage, before Caroline's shadow slowly crept over my sense of self. That girl was still here, and she was not a free babysitter. She was a mother reclaiming space in her own life. One evening, my aunt called me after hearing bits of the story through family. She told me something about Caroline's past that I had never known. When Brian was a child, there had been a custody battle between Caroline and his father. Caroline lost primary custody for a time due to controlling behavior. Suddenly, so much made sense. She was not only trying to control my children. She was trying to rewrite her own history to win a fight she had lost long ago through us. I did not excuse her actions because of this. Pain explains behavior sometimes, but it never excuses harm, especially toward children. Still, knowing this changed how I saw the situation. She was not just cruel for sport. She was repeating a pattern she never healed. That did not soften my resolve. If anything, it strengthened it. I now knew how deep the roots of this control went. But my approach stayed the same.
Firm. Clear.
Not cruel. I would not return hurt for hurt. I would not teach my children that revenge meant destruction. I would teach them that truth, held steady, is stronger than control. The next court date approached. The past was finally about to face the present. A few days later, Brian's lawyer reached out with a settlement offer. At first glance, it seemed like progress. More time for me, written limits for Caroline, softer language in the custody terms. But when my attorney and I read it carefully, the real meaning showed through. It still kept most final decisions out of my hands. It avoided any formal finding of interference. It tried to cover what had happened without admitting what had been done. It protected reputation, not children. For a moment, I felt tempted to accept it just to be done, just to rest. I was tired. Every part of this had cost energy, sleep, peace. Then I pictured my children being told again, in hidden ways, that I was only help. I shook my head. I told my attorney no. We would not sign something that pretended nothing happened. We would not build the future on lies made quiet but still alive. When Brian heard I refused, he did not shout. He just nodded slowly. Maybe for the first time, he understood that pretending peace is not the same as building it. Real peace needed honesty first. Even when honesty is uncomfortable. Court felt different the next time. Not easier. Just clearer. My attorney presented the full picture. The judge asked direct questions, especially to Caroline. She tried to smile through them, but every answer twisted back on itself. When the judge asked if she had ever referred to me as just a babysitter, she hesitated. That pause was louder than any shout. Then, trying to sound calm, she said the words again in court. Well, she acted like one most of the time. The room seemed to breathe in at once. The judge watched her closely. He asked her if she understood how damaging such language was to children. Her answer stumbled again. No rehearsed words could save the moment where her real belief appeared without disguise. I sat very still. Not smiling. Not cheering. Just steady. Because this was not about winning over her. It was about truth being visible in the open. The judge wrote notes for a long time before speaking again. He did not give the final ruling yet. But the shift was undeniable. Her control was cracking where it mattered most. In the light, the judge ordered sanctions. He ruled that interference had occurred and that coaching and manipulation had damaged the children's sense of security. He ordered therapy for them to unlearn fear and pressure. Most important of all, he ordered strict limits on Caroline's involvement in decisions. She was no longer allowed to act as a primary caregiver or decision-maker. For a second, Caroline looked truly stunned, as if she could not imagine a world where she was not in charge of everyone. Brian looked shaken too, but not angry this time. Relieved. The judge then said the final custody decision would be written out and formally read by counsel, not just spoken in the courtroom. He wanted clarity. He wanted every word recorded and understood. When we left the courthouse, I did not feel triumph. I felt breath. For months, I had been holding my breath tight in my chest. Now air finally moved through me, steady and calm. This was not over yet. The final decision still waited in written form, but the direction was clear. The truth was finally reflected not just in private hearts, but in law. We returned to the same law office where everything had begun. The same table, the same chairs, the same quiet air. Tis time felt different. The attorney held the new decision in his hands. Brian sat on one side of the table, his shoulders low, not defiant anymore. Caroline sat rigid, her face tight, like glass that could crack if touched. The attorney began to read. The ruling shifted primary custody to me. It confirmed I had always been a central parent, not a babysitter, not extra help. It warned strongly against further interference and set penalties if boundaries were crossed again. It ordered support for rebuilding the children's trust with both parents in healthy ways. As he read, my hands shook again, but not from fear this time. From release. Caroline stood up before he even finished and walked out fast, heels striking the floor hard. She did not look back. Brian stayed seated. He whispered, "I'm sorry." I nodded. I did not say I forgave him yet, but I did not hate him. The attorney finished reading. This time, the words felt solid. Not fragile. Real. I met with Brian later in a quiet park while the kids played within sight. We talked about the future without yelling, without blaming, just stating simple truth. I told him I would support him being in the children's lives if he respected boundaries. I told him Caroline would not be allowed to control them again or speak about me as anything less than their mother. He agreed. Not because I demanded it, but because he finally saw the cost of silence. I also told him something important. I did not want revenge. I wanted peace that was built honestly, not forced. I wanted our children to grow up knowing their worth, not trapped in someone else's need for control. He nodded and said he would start therapy too on his own. For the first time since all this began, I believed him. The children ran over to us laughing. asking about dinner plans. Their voices were lighter, not carrying the same tightness they had before. I watched them and felt a quiet strength inside me. Not a loud victory, a grounded one. And that kind lasts. Life did not suddenly become perfect. Real life never works like that. But it became real again. Morning routines, homework at the table, movie nights, messy rooms, laughter, tears, questions about everything. Not babysitting. Motherhood. I set new boundaries around our lives. Clear rules about communication, visits, respect, and truth. Not walls of anger. Just strong doors that opened and closed with purpose. Weeks later, an envelope arrived from the court. It was labeled Final Compliance Review. I held it in my hand for a long second, then smiled. Not fear. Just calm responsibility. I thought back to that first day in the office, when Caroline called me a free babysitter. I remembered the sting, the shock, the deep hurt of being erased in front of people who should have known better. I also remembered the moment, later, when I recognized my own strength and decided not to disappear. This story did not end with someone being destroyed. It ended with truth standing firm. I looked at my children playing in the next room and whispered, "I'm here. Not optional. Not extra. Not free help. I am their mother. And that will never be erased again."